Greetings and welcome everybody to the Biblical Rogue Gallery here on Trinity Radio. On a very special occasion, we have changed nights because everyone said they could not make it on Thursdays and they all wanted to make it on Mondays, and yet very few of them actually showed up. So we're going to trash talk them for a little bit. Along with me tonight to start the show is MJ Jackson, the Urban Christian Institute, who is not currently on camera, and he's there. He's shouting in the background. And also the world famous, esteemed theologian, Reverend Dr. Derek P.G. Beeler. How you doing?
Hello. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's usually you and I doing this show by the end of it because everyone else bails on us. Somebody says, I love it when Pritchett puts up comments out of context. LOL. Pritchett doesn't know what he's doing as a producer. This is our 15th show, and I still am trying to figure out how all of this works, Amber. So bear with us. I didn't even mean to click that. I did. I also view Genesis the same. I don't even know what that's about. But here you go. I don't even know what I'm doing. Anyway, tonight we are going to be getting into Romans 4 and finish that off 13 through 25, I think. What how far does that go? See, this is how prepared.
25. Yep.
That's how I was right. And we had some comments from previous episodes where people said, y'all need to jump right into the video instead of all of that banter at the beginning, because us old people, and I don't know if people realize this, but I consider myself old people, okay? I'm 47 years old. So I don't know who young people are because I am old people. But us old people do not have the patience to sit around when we're trying to learn stuff. But hey, this show is about useless, inane banter for at least 45 minutes out of the entire thing. So I'm just thinking when I see comments like that, Braxton, these people are saying these things, and I'm like, yeah, they must be new here. We prattle on with inane banter for a while.
Well, I mean, if you get the right subject, we can go for quite a while too.
Yeah, and man, what a week it's been. It seems like the whole internet blew up over a Kansas City Chief kicker saying something about women will find value as a wife and a mother. Like awful stuff. This flame throwing stuff.
And somebody who lives right outside Kansas City, this has been fun. When the official Kansas City government Twitter tried to dox him and then deleted it, and in a frantic, panic, tried to apologize and misspelled the word apologize, and everybody just raised them.
When something like that happens, I like to listen to the whole thing. And everyone mischaracterized what the dude said. The dude was like, you're going to go on and have great careers and all of that, but you're also going to find that you've been lied to, because being a wife and mother is one of the most important things you'll ever do, and among other things that these women might do. But then he told the men to act like men. I thought that was good. But what I liked about his speech is what nobody reported on, and what I think needs to happen, because he's a Catholic. But the part that interested me was none of that stuff. I mean, people go crazy and take that kind of culture war stuff. But what he did that I thought was fantastic was he spent the first 5 to 7 minutes blasting his own Catholic Church. That calling out the priests with all their liberal theology and all that, and straying away from the teachings of the Catholic Church. I was on board with that, because I see a lot of that happening in the evangelical community that nobody calls out, except for the people that you can't stand, who call out everything that no one pays attention to them anymore.
Yeah.
So can y'all hear me?
No.
Yeah, barely. You need to turn your mic up. But most people that call out the bad stuff in evangelicalism have been doing it for 35 years, and no one hears it anymore. But we don't have somebody outside. It's like a pastor like John MacArthur or somebody like that that's was relevant 20 years ago. But we don't have anybody in the culture doing that. We have other popular preachers saying this, that, and the other. But I don't know. I thought that stuff held my attention more than all the other stuff that people are throwing a fit about, with what he said, that women might find happiness being a wife and a mother, which is I'm an egalitarian, and I found nothing controversial about that.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me now?
No.
I can hear you. You're just not very loud.
If you're going to interrupt us,
How about now? How about now?
Better.
Yeah. Do a little bit more. Run it a little bit hotter.
Oh, hold on. Y'all keep talking. I don't want to blast our ears
Oh,
out.
you're good.
Yeah, now you're getting there. Yeah. Now you're getting there. It was getting up there. It was fine before the show. Anyway,
my camera was blurry after the show started. I was like, what the heck?
that's your breath fogging up. No, I'm just kidding.
All right. How about now?
Yeah, we can hear you. There you go.
Okay. Let me play the devil's advocate.
Go for it.
What about the nuns in the room? What about them?
Good question.
They might want to do the things to have children.
Well, they could have, but they decided to make a vow to not do that.
I mean, is their profession or vocation any less important? I mean,
yeah, but that's like a covenant thing, right? I mean, it's like with the nuns, they take a specific vow to be certain.
Who's your audience? That's number one.
Well, yeah.
Well, yeah, but to play devil's advocate back, there's a difference between being a nun and serving your church community and being the woman who doesn't want to get married but will sit there and get bossed around by her boss who is lazy and sits around and watches porn on his computer when no one's in his office.
And he didn't call them out.
And she's gonna work for that dude for 45, 50 hours a week. And that's more important than being a wife. And I mean, yeah, well, I mean, that's why I'm here to call them all out. Because
there you go.
I call out everybody. But I mean, yeah, I mean, I didn't think that what he said was controversial. I mean, come on.
I thought he was talking to his audience. That's number one.
He said a lot of Catholic things to Catholic people. So what?
Yeah,
my
ahead,
two sisters and my mom heard it, and they thought it was perfectly fine.
Yeah.
So if my opinion doesn't count because I'm a guy, I have women to reference.
He
Wait till you get married. Even with a traditional wife, your opinion won't matter much.
So I based on who he was talking to, I thought he was okay. I mean, the nuns might feel some type of way. The young ladies who majored. I mean, his mom is a physicist, I believe.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So that's something. But she did a good job with him, I guess. So
he seemed all right. I mean, people in the NFL have said worse.
I just don't understand. The meme is wife beating.
Yeah, I just don't understand why that even made the news.
No.
And of all the things to make the news, the fact that he was calling out the Catholic Church did not make anybody's news, and that was the only thing that I found actually interesting about the whole thing was him calling out his own church. So. I was like, yeah, do that. But nobody ever wants to talk about that because that's the irrelevant stuff. If you talk about the, gender stuff, that's going to get people's attention. But
it's something to be calling out the progressivism and liberalism of your faith whenever he's not a faith, like he's a football player. He's not a minister. Because you can say like, oh, well, John MacArthur and his ilk, they'll talk cultural issues. It's like, yeah, but they're like in that bubble doing it. So like the common people of the culture aren't going to hear that. But whenever you have a kicker for the NFL saying it gets more traction to the general public, right?
Yeah. And that's exactly what like evangelicals need, because what you don't need is the people, that are evangelical pastors, apologists or whatever, like that progressive Christian guy, what is his name? Kevin Young or whatever.
Yeah.
Just post absolute nonsense drivel all the time. And okay, so
Kevin M. Young, I think.
Kevin M. Young. So when he posts his progressive liberal Christian, we're talking about like theological liberalism, not necessarily political, but I mean, it's political stuff too. But I mean, really it's theological liberalism. When a preacher responds back to that, nobody cares.
Mm-hmm.
But if you had a football player knock down that kind of trash Christianity, that would be something. But we don't have people doing that. We have we have people you expect to do it, which is why nobody pays any attention to it.
Well, let me ask this, because I have somebody in mind that may or may not count. John Cooper from Skillet. He's pretty vocal, but he is known for being in a Christian band.
Right.
So,
see, no.
but they got the secular reach too, so it's like
but only kind of.
True.
But
True.
only kind of.
We need somebody fully in the secular.
I saw Skillet, I don't know, 12, 13, 14 years ago. I thought it was a fine concert, but that's not like somebody from, a major record label or something calling it out, So, I mean, it's just weird that Catholics have like so many people in the cultural space that are devout. But the evangelicals that are devout, even on the Chiefs, the quarterback, for example, strong Christian guy, strong family guy. I don't even remember any of these people's names. So yeah. So you've got people like that, but they don't ever make the news because they don't ever like throw out bombs, and maybe there's something to be said by that, just be a good example, in your personal life, which that goes a long way too. So,
but Booker he's said stuff before. It was a few months ago. Like I had my kids listen to a clip from a speech where he essentially said, like, you guys have accomplished so much. And he's like, but I have 2 Super Bowl rings, but the ring that means most to me is this one, pointing to his wedding ring. And he's like, my advice to you, get married, start a family, Yeah. So it's like what he said, I didn't even think was anything new for him. It's just, I guess it was a slow news week or something, and they had to blow something up.
The only relevant thing anyone in the NFL ever said was, I'm just here so I don't get fined. Yeah. I always think it's hilarious when somebody does something on the field and they get a fine in the NFL. It's like their fine is more than my yearly salary. And I'm like, ugh.
Like, yeah, it's like a parking ticket to them.
Yeah. I mean, there's not a lot of 5'8", 47-year-old white guys in the NFL, but if there was anything, I would take the league minimum in a heartbeat over what I do now.
I was like, you could probably make sizable just being a bench warmer and never seeing the field at all in a real game.
So Romans chapter 4, verses 13 through 25. Raised for our justification. I love that line in verse 25. And everything kind of leads into that. And it causes me to recap of last week, because we started talking about justification last week, or whenever it was, 2 weeks ago. And we talk about our slogans, especially among Protestant Christianity. We talk about our slogans, justification by faith alone. But you also hear, you've got, we're justified by blood, Romans 3, justified by grace, justified by the resurrection here in Romans 25, verse 4:25. You've got justified by faith apart from works of the law. And then you also have justified by works and not by faith alone in James chapter 2, way on out there. And then people are trying to figure all of this out, and they come up with various degrees of laughable to solid explanations for how they balance all of that. Mine on Trinity Radio Extra, our other channel that doesn't have, that's infrequently updated. I have a whole thing on James chapter 2 that you can go listen to, and it's made a lot of people happy and a lot of people irritated. Don't care. But when you start to have 5 different things that talk about justification, the word alone starts to, you have to really bend the meaning of the word alone, as in singular, because most of these things, they really, on God's end of the justification, and that we'll get into that in Romans chapter 8. It is God who justifies. That's towards the end of chapter 8 in Romans. But then there's also this stuff. It's not by works of the law, but we also have verses like it's not by faith alone, but Jesus's resurrection, the grace of God, the blood of Jesus, all of that is phrases. And I think we talked about in a prior episode how that predates some of that stuff about justified by the blood and all that. That language in Romans chapter 3 is predating Paul. He's using prior confessional material. You can go listen to those episodes. We covered all that. And so justification wasn't quite as tidy as post-Reformation type stuff would have us all believe. And so I think when you're doing theology but not really looking at the text, you can truncate all of the things about justification that the Bible actually does talk about and replace it with things that the Bible doesn't really talk about when it's using the language of justification. Would y'all agree with that, or y'all want to be devil's advocate with that, or what?
Well, I think it's a result of probably taking one aspect of it and like hyper focusing on it in reaction to something else. I think that's what a lot of that.
That's definitely I mean, you could say that that's the history of the church where, I mean, anytime there's a controversy, whether real or perceived, people highlight one thing to get clarity, but then subsequent generations can take that one thing and run too far with it, I think.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. And if I could use an example, when I read Bondage of the Will by Martin Luther, he talks against free will all the time, but he's not doing it in the categories that we think of in our modern times. In fact, sometimes what he means by free will is he's just speaking against works salvation, like meritorious salvation, something like that. But nowadays, when people read free will, they have this metaphysical idea in mind and they read it into everything he says. And so they kind of miss a lot of his points that he's making.
Yeah, I mean, for those who haven't read it, it is a cumbersome read because it's a engagement with Erasmus and heavy quoting back and forth, which makes it kind of labor intensive to read. So, but yeah, it's interesting, but you know, and then Erasmus's response, I loved Erasmus in Praise of Folly. But then reading Erasmus's responses to Luther made me lose a ton of respect because he was just whining all the time about tone. And I was like, come on, Erasmus, I thought you were awesome. And now you're being a whiny baby. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting to read all of that, but you're right. Sometimes we impose our ideas. You can eisegete Luther, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, just like you can. Eisegesis isn't something that pertains solely to scripture. You can do that to any book, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's not just a biblical studies thing, as if it doesn't happen anywhere. You can eisegete a Star Wars novel from the 90s, right? For anyone who ever read the Expanded Universe.
Nerd. I know.
But I'm just saying, I mean, you can read ideas into older books. That's why you should I mean, C.S. Lewis always talked about it. For every new book you read one or two old books, right? Mm. Because you should get your mind into that, because the more you read older literature, the more your categories shift. Like you were able to detect that maybe he was using free will in a way that philosophical discourse doesn't quite use it in the modern context, right? Mm-hmm. And you can pick up on that the more you read older works within a certain time period. You can kind of figure out that, oh, they're dealing in different categories. The apostles didn't have a theological dictionary. They just had words. We pack up words with tons of theological ideas and then apply them absolutely. James Barr warned about this a long time ago. Mm-hmm. And he was talking about, you know, we overload a lot, especially key terms of systematic theology. We overload them with so much theological freight that they never actually originally had. And so you can misread a lot of things so I always tell people at the very beginning, you can find technical uses of words in the New Testament. I mean, Paul sometimes, I would say that called would be an example of Paul using a regular word in a more technical sense. So you can do that, but it's not as frequent as you think. And they were just words and they already had a meaning. And that becomes important when you're talking about a book like Romans, because Paul was not the founder of this church. And we can detect within the book of Romans, Paul appealing to non-original source material to communicate to his audience, to build a bridge to it, you know, certain confessional material that predates him. Same thing in like Philippians, when you have like Philippians 2, for example, the hymn there. There's all these confessional bits, but Rome was not founded by Paul. And so the language that Paul has to use is language that can't be overly technical, but has to be what everyone in the shared audience would understand. And if you load it with so much Pauline theology that didn't even probably that you're pulling from later letters, that you're trying to run back into prior letters, and then later theological reflection that you're reading back into all of it, you're probably missing a lot of stuff that you're adding to the text that isn't there, and missing the things in the text that are there that we're not paying attention to. And that's why we're trying to do this kind of series, so that we can get through it all and see what's going on in that text. So let's get to the text. MJ, you have not read in a while, so
he gets the long one.
He gets the long one, but he's got that voice.
There you go.
I've got an Arkansas twangy voice. No one wants to hear me read.
Can y'all still hear me?
We can.
Okay. I plugged in my mic in a different USB port, so I don't know. My poor computer might be on its last leg. For the promise, well, this is Romans 4:13 through 25 NASB. For the promise to Abraham, or to his descendants, that he would be heir of the world, was not through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. For if those who are of the law are heirs, then faith is made void, and the promise is nullified. For the law brings about wrath. But where there is no law, there also is no violation. For this reason, it is by faith, in order that it may be in accordance with grace, so that the promise will be guaranteed to all the descendants, not only to those who are of the law, but also those who are of the faith of Abraham, who is father of us all. As it is written, I have made you a father of many nations, in the presence of him whom he believed, that is, God, who gives life to the dead and calls into being things that do not exist. In hope against hope he believed, so that he might become a father of many nations, according to that which had been spoken. So shall your descendants be. Without becoming weak in faith, he contemplated his own body, now as good as dead, since he was about 100 years old, and the deadness of Sarah's womb. Yet with respect to the promise of God, he did not waver in unbelief, but grew strong in faith, giving glory to God, and being fully assured that what God had promised, he was able also to perform. Therefore, it was also credited to him as righteousness. Now, not for his sake only was it written that it was credited to him, but for our sake also, to whom it will be credited to us, who believe in him who was raised, Jesus our Lord, from the dead. He who was delivered over because of our wrongdoings and was raised because of our justification.
Yeah, so my initial thoughts about this is it seems that for the time being, Paul has moved out of being overly polemical, right? I mean, he was fairly polemical for the latter half of chapter 1, almost all of chapter 2, and almost all of chapter 3. But he seems to be moving into a less polemical form of discussion here. Do y'all get that sense that
Yes.
this yeah. So my initial thoughts about this is it seems like now he's moving in. This is kind of where, and when I say universal, I'm not talking about like universalism, everyone will be saved, but I'm talking about scope. Like this is where he's trying to really ram home the universality of God's redemption and why faith is that identity marker as opposed to works of the law. And returning to Abraham, you know, he went from Abraham to David to Abraham again, and he's continuing on with Abraham, trying to show that it is those who had the faith like Abraham is inclusive language for the Gentiles, right? While still trying to show that the Jews are also included. They haven't, and this becomes a major issue in Romans 9 through 11. What about the Jews? But it seems like he's like, it's by faith, but there are those of the law who are heirs and those who are, of the faith of Abraham. So to me, this seems to be a far less polemical and more, trying to be, this is the lovey-dovey inclusiveness kind of language.
Mm-hmm.
He's trying to open this up. So
a soft unifying of it all.
Right. That's kind of, so that's just my read of it. And Nick's not here to tell me why Paul's still being a jerk, but and maybe he is, or maybe Nick would agree that this is where I think there's like tonal shifts all throughout the book of Romans, because he'll return to the diatribe again. But this seems to be very pastoral as far as trying to explain things.
Yeah, so it's kind of like he's got to come in hard, put everybody where they need to be, and then it's like, all right, now here's the beautiful truth of all that.
Yeah. MJ?
Yeah, we are seeing a shift within Paul. And I guess maybe last time y'all talked about a little bit of an antithesis between God's original plan of promise and Israel's specific law practices. And what we're seeing is a shift between practicing the law and thinking that righteousness can come by law, and really honing in on Abraham, who was credited to be righteous by the grace of God, by faith. And so we're kind of seeing those elements come out. And of course, I'm pretty sure Nick would have something specific to say.
Well, if we can hear it over his fan, air conditioner, or whatever it is.
We all don't have that Trinity radio money to blow on silent fans.
Yeah. Well, maybe not wear a hoodie if you're hot.
Gotta wear something. All my clothes haven't been washed. I don't know what you want from me.
Okay, so you're Pauline, Nick. On
my mother's side, yes.
Yeah, Pauline. I mean, that's so feminine sounding, even.
My mother named me Nick, but you can call me Pauline anytime.
Yeah. So, am I correct in my understanding that this is shifting, at least for the moment, away from polemics into pastoral, more teaching, explanatory, without the edge to it that we found for the first 3 chapters? Or what's your read on this section before we get into your nitty-gritty PowerPoint?
I think Paul he's moved from being antagonistic. I think you're right. I think he's moved away from being antagonistic. I think right now he cares about constructive theology. And I think that'll reach kind of a nice little climax in 5:1, where the subjunctive is used and not the indicative. And we'll get there next week. But there is a pastoral note that often gets missed here. I think you're right. I don't think Paul's polemically minded here, if I can say. I think you're right. I would say he's moved from polemics to persuasion, confirmation, exhortation, not in a strict exhortation sense, but kind of I'm trying to build something here out of the ashes of everything that I've just scorched, so to speak.
Yeah, but so my question here is, chapter 4, if you listen to like the Protestant Catholic debates on justification, because of the contentiousness of that whole debate, chapter 4 has often been read as if it's still polemical, right? And the stress here is not how does one get right with God, and it's not by patting yourself on the back for your proto-Pelagian efforts, and earnings and all of that.
Or for your indulgences and all the other stuff. Right.
But this is really Paul's explaining that the inclusiveness of God. I don't know if you heard me go into that spiel, but it seems to be trying to ground the Jew plus Gentile vision of Christ's work for this audience. And I think this is setting up some stuff that he's going to come back to in 9 through 11.
I think you're right. I think what Paul's trying to do is he's done a lot of contrastive work in chapters 1 through 3. And what he's doing now is essentially, and I think he's preempting what he's going to argue in Romans 9 and following. There's a very strong sense of an understanding of human history that was built on contrasts, that was built on, and we see that in Galatians 3, Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male and female, and all the other baptismal formulas. And Paul, I think Paul here is not trying to assert a major doctrine of justification by faith, but more of a theology of history. And what I mean by that is, if Abraham is who Paul says he is, and he is, then Abraham is the previous sewing together of Jew and Gentile, and this has always been God's plan and purpose to do so, but it gets summarized, or I almost said it's Christotelic, if I can use a snotty seminary term. It's Christotelic in that the goal of all of this was not Abraham, it was Christ as the one who sews it all together and brings it back together, as we would say in like Ephesians 2. He's broken down the dividing wall of hostility, and you who are formerly pagans, formerly this, formerly that, formerly without God in the universe or in the world, have been brought near, so to speak. And so Abraham was the initial kind of cause of faith, and faith has not changed, as far as I can tell, from Abraham to Christ. In fact, actually, the subjective genitive fits very nicely with, as Abraham was faithful, so too Christ was faithful. And incorporative righteousness, if we want to use that term, is far more interesting and relevant to Romans than it is to the debate between Protestants and Catholics.
So before we get into the nitty-gritty of your PowerPoint, just real quick, if you could summarize, what is the main thing here that we would miss if we're reading this as, like you just said, if Paul's trying to establish like some sort of systematic doctrine or a theology of justification as opposed to anything, what is the function of justification here to Paul's, what he's actually on about? Like, do we miss the historical, redemptive historical thing, or are we missing something else?
We are missing two things. One is apocalyptic, and I have to go there, sorry. But apocalyptic in the sense of fulfillment, a sudden, eruptive, invasive fulfillment that gives a whole new sense of meaning to the past and to history itself. History kind of gets restructured and reorientated around the Christ event. And that is why, Paul ends with raised for our justification and so on and so forth. And we'll get there. Yeah. But also we miss, and I think this is really important, and this is endemic to our culture with tribalism, is that we miss the ethnic racial component of Jew and Gentile, pagan and Jew, being incorporated into one body. That is Christ. And that somehow Christ's Jewish flesh and Abraham's Jewish flesh can incorporate Gentile believers into the one body. Yeah. And so you get this really, I think, powerful denunciation of ethno-radicalism or identitarianism that affirms the goodness of the body, the goodness of us as creatures, in the sense of we are good to be redeemed, not that we are intrinsically good or what have you.
Right.
But that you have a strong reconciliation between two formerly hostile parties, Jew and Gentile, being incorporated. So you have an ethnic and missional and ecclesial thing here that undergirds everything. If Jew and Gentile can be justified as Abraham was justified through faith, and as Christ justifies us through faith, then you don't have ethno-supremacy, you have the body of Christ. And that is at the heart of everything we do as Christians. So
Nick said ethno-radicalism.
I could have just called it Christian nationalism, but I thought about being a little more interesting.
There's a loaded term.
Please. Oh, goodness.
That'll come later in Romans, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Give it a few chapters. So, by the way, right, how's it going, Derek? How's it going, Pritchard? How's it going, MJ? Sorry for not saying hello.
We're fine. MJ had to step out for a minute to go pick up his far better half, and he said he'll be back soon. So I like what you put here, because I did preview the PowerPoint before the show, which actually I don't have time to do a whole lot. When I was
I'm glad I've given you the time to do it now that I'm back.
I like it. How should we think of faith? Should it be related to hope in verse 18? I like that question because we were able to touch on this in a prior episode, but I don't think we did quite the deep dive because we had other fish to fry, so to speak. That's a Southern term, but we had other fish to fry. And so we didn't really get into this. And I think that's a really good question because there's a lot of discussion in the literature on how we should think about faith, the loyalty, the believing allegiance, all of that kind of discussion. Matthew Bates opened this up, Scott McKnight, all these guys are coming. The Eastern Orthodox have been sitting around saying, yeah, we had that conversation 1,500 years ago. Welcome to the party.
Great book. Paul and the Language of Faith by Nijay Gupta out at Northern Seminary.
Yeah, okay.
Good stuff.
Yeah, so that's Scott McKnight Seminary. So, right?
He's moved on to somewhere else, but yeah, that was Scott McKnight Seminary.
So there's a lot of discussion about that. So why don't you lay down the groundwork for that? Because you're probably more familiar. I read Bates's book, but most of my stuff was when I came to it. I had always had, I guess, for the past 15 to 20 years, just from reading the context group scholars, that understanding that loyalty or allegiance was just kind of stock and trade for all the cultural guys, the socio-cultural guys. So, but they weren't really interested in theological implications because, they're not pastors. And like the most conservative people in that group probably would have been De Silva. I think Keener was in it for a while. Nere, if you want to count him as maybe more of a moderate, theological moderate, but they really weren't interested in how you import that to practical theology. So as a pastor, why does that discussion about what faith is matter?
So I'll step on some toes here. I view the question as being kind of similar to the once saved, always saved thing, where often people and atheists and Christians have this belief that once I mentally assent to a proposition or fall into a vat of water or say a magical incantation, that I have therefore been saved and God requires nothing more of me. I've done the bare minimum of what I'm required to do. And of course, I'm being simplistic about it just to prove a point. And the point is
going to say you're works-based.
Well, they can kiss my works.
Just by saying God expects more than...
I think here's the thing. Every time you see faith in the New Testament or pistis or the lexeme or the word group for faith, pistis or trust, it almost always is what we might call an embodied expression, and I'm being paraphrastic, an embodied expression of what you believe to be true. So what I mean by that is if you believe Jesus Christ is Lord, then Jesus Christ is Lord over all that you do. He's not Lord just on Sundays from 9 to 11 a.m. He's not Lord on Wednesday nights from 7 to 8:30 when you go to Bible study. He's not Lord over your baptism. He is also Lord over what you look at online. He is Lord about what you do when you pay your taxes. He is the Lord of your life when you drive to work in the morning and what you say to people on your drive to work in the morning if you're like me and drive in California traffic. Suffice to say, faith is an embodied expression of what you believe to be true. And if you believe that Christ is Lord, then he is not just Lord in a metaphysical, propositional, oh yes, I mentally assented to this thing. It's like, no, my whole life is now wrapped up in this claim that demands my allegiance in an embodied or living fashion. That is, when I tell people at my church, if you believe that Jesus Christ is Lord and you don't live as if he's Lord, then you don't believe he's Lord. And it's the same thing Jesus said. Why do you call me Lord and not do what I tell you to do? That's Nick Quint version, right? You can talk about, oh, Jesus is my Lord, or I'm a Christian, or I'm this. I'm like, I know nothing of what you say because your life looks just like everyone else. Your life looks utterly secularized, utterly debased, utterly this. And so I think faith must be grappled with in the sense of it has an element of trust, that what I'm doing, I trust in the object of my allegiance. It has that political connotation as well of allegiance, but it is an embodied habitual discipline of actual living in service to what I believe to be true. And it's not, and I hate the atheist canard thing too, because it's just as silly, it's just as simplistic. Faith is not believing without evidence. any
Right.
more than it. Yeah, it's lazy, guys. Step up your game. You can affirm what Bates says or what Gupta says or what Teresa Morgan says or what I'm saying and still be an atheist. It's not an L to actually just get behind what actual scholarship says. And say
Yes.
and so anyway, I'll stop talking. But
Well, I was
that's
going to
how
bring
I
that
would
up because,
generally
you know,
gloss the term. It is an ethical, an ethical term at its heart because ethics are embodied, and that's how we live.
yeah, because I was going to bring that up. You know, coming from kind of an apologetics background, it's like we do encounter the atheist that, well, faith is believing without evidence, but the allegiance, a good way to understand it, this trust commitment, you know,
Yeah, you can render it that way. Yeah.
yeah, is based upon the past evidence, you know, and it seems like this historical argument is we can have faith in God to perform in the future based upon the evidence of what he has already performed in the past. So past performance is the grounding for future expectation to fulfill the promise. And so faith in that kind of context is that loyalty is I can trust this God based upon what he has done.
Mhm.
History. That is why Abraham and history and Christ are all woven together.
But
Abraham believed God and it was recognized to him as righteousness.
but Abraham himself brings up, what did Abraham have in the Genesis account by which to base that because you could almost try to argue that I mean, I don't want to get all Kierkegaardian here, but you could almost argue that for Abraham it had to have been a blind allegiance or a blind leap.
No, not in an ancient context, because you can, if God, if you see figures speaking to you and you're engaged in that way, one, you believe gods can actually do that, or at least divine figures, all that sort of stuff. Like Heiser, I think, is right on that. There is the difference between the supernatural realm and the natural realm is like made of cheesecloth. Like, there's really no distinction between them. But also, I mean, Abraham could look at the history of things. He could trust it. I mean, if God is the creator and all that sort of stuff, then this God knows him. This God engages with him. Also, you have what God tells him that he's going to do. And there is an element, I wouldn't say blind faith or anything like that, but an understanding of there does require me to give of myself. Like faith, and that's where the ethics, the ethics and the agency come in with faith. Faith is not just a passive, I do stuff. It's like, no, I'm actually told to do something. And do I believe what this divine figure, this God, this friend, this spouse, this child, this enemy tells me?
So not to skip ahead, because I think getting into an ancient mindset where if the creator God shows up and has a conversation with you, you could pretty much bank on it. And that is evidence in and of itself
Revelation is evidence.
But is that what Paul is getting? I know we're just skipping ahead here, but the life from the dead giving God who calls into things that didn't exist into existence. I mean, is
this relevant to the question? Under faith, should it be seen as related to hope? Like that's what he was going from was the hope,
but also God told him what would happen. And so you have the initial, I trust, I will act in belief that this is what God has said is true. And then when it comes true, that is confirmation that what God said was true is true. That's the same. That's why resurrection is so important. That's God vindicating his word. For example, saying stuff like, my wife is childless, but your wife will bear a child. And it's like, I trust that will happen. And then when it does happen, you're not surprised. I mean, you're a little surprised, of course. There's a little room for that. But also that's like, oh, that is vindicating my allegiance to what God said would happen. And so you have kind of a both and there, I think.
Well, would Abraham, I mean, this might be in the realm of speculation. Would he have had some idea of how Yahweh had operated in the past before he called him? Would there have been some possible general knowledge of the workings?
Well, according to Paul in Romans 1, the answer is yes. But if you take 18 through 30.
Well, and you also have the issue too of God appearing to Abraham throughout Genesis 12, 13, 14, 15. Like he's revealing himself and speaking with him and telling him where to go, that there was a famine in the land, and God sent him to Egypt. So already he has reason to trust this God because he's been spared from famine and hardship and violence, even through his own lies, that God was faithful to him when he lied about his wife to the, to the Egyptians, and so it's like
Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah. Like, so God has demonstrated his worthiness to be trusted in. And that's, sorry, I'm in preaching mode. I preached on this on Sunday in Revelation 5. The Lamb is worthy of worship because he has shown himself to be worthy, as opposed to every other political ideological figure. God showed himself to be worthy of Abraham's faith and allegiance and trust. And then God made his promise, and Abraham believed God, and it was recognized to him as righteousness.
Yeah, so I think, the Genesis 12 through 15, those 3 chapters are operating in just the snippets that Paul pulls from them here, right? And then you could say 22 as well, I guess. But I mean, this New Testament, or at least this Pauline use of the Old Testament, you do have to familiarize yourself with the whole account, but not just that. And I know people they hate the idea of reading between the lines, but one of the things that you have to do is reconstruct the social and theological and ideological world of the author and the audience and the people at the, in the original audience. And so a lot of that context that you're talking about, when deities, lowercase deities in the ancient world showed up to speak, that in itself, that revelation, whether it's Yahweh or in other ancient texts with other lesser, weird things, whether you take those as having ever occurred or it's just all fiction, whatever, the thought of anyone in the ancient world would have been, this is for real. And that itself is evidence. And so if you're a Christian and you're going to believe that this narrative account is a literal account of something that happened on this planet in history, from Abraham's perspective, even as a pagan from Ur, he would have thought, oh my goodness, I'm having one of those conversations that he's probably known about in pagan literature that predates anything written by the Hebrew people. So that's his background. So this would be a reason that just the conversation itself would have been sufficient for him to quote Paul, hope against hope, right?
Mm-hmm. And I like what you were saying about his understanding of history, like looking back, because my mind immediately went to stuff like Psalm 13, which ends that it's like a lament psalm, but it ends with, but I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me, which reflects in the past. But also like Psalm 77 is another lament psalm, which is just really dark and just portrays so much anguish and pain. But then it ends, the last half of it is him reflecting upon the Exodus. And that's like his source of hope and therefore faith in Yahweh to be faithful to what he has promised and for deliverance.
So unpack the nature of this promise. I mean, because Paul does bank a lot on this idea of promise, right? So just to refresh, that he would be the heir of the world was not through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. For if those who are of the law are heirs, then faith is made void, and the promise is nullified. Paul seems to put a lot on that, the faith, and not just the law creating the community. What I guess Paul would be talking about here is talking about those who are of the law or heirs. What he means is that the law creates the eschatological people of God, when it is faith that creates the eschatological people of God in accordance to the promise, and why it's inclusive of Gentiles. So, I mean, it seems to say this law versus faith would be made void and the promise would be nullified if it was through Torah. So this is going to raise an interesting question that gets into later chapters about the role of Torah. But
well, I think Paul's point is that faith preceded Torah. And there is a debate in Second Temple Judaism. I can't remember the specific reference. I want to say it was it Jubilees? There are certain Jewish texts that believe the law is eternal. I'd have to, and I'm going off of memory, so I don't have a source or citation in mind. But let's just say that's true, just for the sake of argument. Paul's point basically destroys that. The law is not eternal, and that's a point he also makes in Galatians. The law is mediated by angels. So already you got something different there. But his point, and I think Paul's point is that faith precedes all of these things. Law is a response to human sin. Law is all these sorts of things. Law is basically how God corrals basically his creation going rogue or going wrong. But faith was before law. And so faith is the means by which God made his promise to Abraham before the law.
Right.
God made his promise to Abraham before he had to do all these other stuff. And so Paul's basically at the original context, not the subsequent context. And so that, I think that's kind of, I don't know if that quite answers it, but I think that's kind of
because I mean, he goes on and he brings it. This comes up again later in Romans in verse 15 about the law brings about wrath. And that's kind of, goes back to, I mean, that comes up in a similar sense. We've already addressed that in chapter 2. It comes up again in Romans 7, right? So the problem is not with the law itself, but the inability of people because of sin to keep it, that the law can't be the vehicle of the eschatological people. But the interesting thing that he says here, and he repeats again in the next chapter, and I've read all of my commentaries on my shelf that I inherited from Dr. Elliott. I only had a few Roman commentaries, got a lot more, and then I got even more in Logos, and I'm looking at this, and Pauline literature is not my big, I don't get into all the nitty gritty of but there's so many things that there's either several explanations or people who try to, what I would call, explain away this idea of where there is no law, there is no violation. What in the heck?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody knows what to do. Well, some people think they know what to do with it, but I don't know what to do with it.
Well, one of the things David Scholler said, a famous American Baptist New Testament scholar, he basically said, when you have 50 different interpretations about what a verse means, usually it means what it seems to say that it means. And the joke is that where there is no law, neither is there transgression, because transgression comes forth from the knowing violation of breaking a law. But if you don't have law or Torah, let's say it's Torah, to conscript you, you can't break a law that you don't know about.
Well, that's the thing. The commentaries are going to be like, well, everyone has a law on their hearts, depending on how you take Romans chapter 2. If that's not envisioning and laying down a marker for new covenant Gentile believers, then Romans 2 is about a natural moral law, which we already, I think most of us on the panel, not everyone, had rejected that interpretation and understood Romans chapter 2 as being Jeremiah language applied to Gentile believers. And so what they would say, what some of the commentaries would say is, well, the law here is just talking about that universal moral law on the hearts that brings about wrath. But where there is no law, there is no violation. And what they would say about that is there's no specific accounting for it. Like, it's not being recorded. It's not being like tallied up in your demerits list, but it doesn't mean that you're not punishable for it. That's a common, like, mainstream evangelical commentary type of way. I saw about 4 or 5 commentaries that took that tact.
Yeah. Well, part of me, because I'm glad that it's as like it has so many different interpretations, because I didn't know much what to do with it myself when I read it in preparation for this, but kind of where my mind was thinking is he using law as what is unique to the Torah law rather than just like the ceremonial stuff that obviously Gentiles aren't going to be partaking in, but the Jews were expected to, and if they didn't, they were sitting through that. But I just didn't think it fit well with the context to limit it to something like that. But
yeah, what I think that this means, to be perfectly honest with you, is that where he says there is no violation, he's not saying there is no sin against God prior to the giving of Torah for any human being, whether they were Hebrews prior to Sinai or they were pagans. Mm-hmm. What I think he's saying here is because Abraham was prior to the law and that establishes faith, and the law brings about wrath in a way that to whom much is given, much is required kind of thing, that this is more to buffer the point that Paul's making of why the faith of Abraham can ground pagans and Jews alike in the, well, Nick's word, Christotelic, that's not a seminary word, that's a Pauline literature word, by the way. That's not a Pauline folks use it.
Christotelic. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so what I think is, I think this is just a way of saying it goes beyond the just, well, God recognized that there was sin in the world that's punishable, but he's not keeping a record. No, what I think he's saying is where there was not this Torah that brings about wrath, there's no violation of that Torah, which is Abraham committed no, even though Abraham was sinful, did all kinds of deceitful things.
There it is.
It could have been Abraham's prior to the law meant that faith was a justifiable thing as opposed to the tally keeping of violations versus
it's simpler than that, Pritchett. For the law, and I'm going to be paraphrastic with it, so I'm going to have to read into the text to make it say something I think it's what it's saying. For the law brings wrath, but where there is no law, neither is there transgression for Abraham.
Yeah, but I would say that's exactly what I just kind of said. That's the
no, I just said it's simpler.
Yeah,
right.
And that's the reason why faith, apart from works of Torah, is what justifies, because what he's saying, there is no violation. Doesn't mean there's no sin. Doesn't mean that nobody's punishable prior to Mount Sinai. What he's saying is, because Abraham's faith is that which is God's badge for right wiseness, or whatever it is you apocalyptic people say, for justification, that's why the law brings wrath that keeps unbelieving Jews outside of the covenant, when believing Jews and believing Gentiles, the people of faith, that's why they can be the eschatological, justified, right-wised people of God. And that's all that's really trying to establish for the audience.
Well, he's establishing that Abraham is the source of these nations, and God is bringing it back together. And you have for the law brings wrath, but Abraham's before the law. But this is a consequence. If this is all right, and this isn't polemics, but it's kind of he's kind of reduced. For the law brings wrath, but where there is no law, neither there's transgression. It's like, well, then we don't have a problem with Father Abraham, do we? Is kind of to the audience. We don't have a problem, do we? Because Right.
It goes back up to what he says earlier in the chapter. Now, to the one who works, the wages are not credited as a favor, but as what is due. But the one who does not work, but believes in him who justifies God, to him it is credited as righteousness. And then goes on to David and forgiveness of sins. It's like, if you're in the work system of the law that brings wrath, you are going to have these transgressions accounted. If you're of the faith of Abraham, whether Jew or Gentile, none of that applies, because justification doesn't have to do with that whole system, right?
Well, so help me out here, because whenever I was looking at this, talking about Abraham was before the law, so then I started thinking, hey, the very next chapter, Romans 5, he says death reigned from Adam to Moses, and the verse right before that, he says, for until the law, sin was in the world, but sin is not counted against anyone when there is no law. So is he currently setting that up, or is that like a completely different context?
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. This is not the only time in Romans, and then commentaries start flying off the handle about it. So, exactly. Yep. He repeats it in the very next chapter. This is a thing that and I agree with you that the simplest explanation is, well, when we're talking about you're talking about in an accounting reckoning term, however you want to take that, prior to the law, this faithfulness, if you're going to do the works route, that can never avail you of anything, because you're going to get your wages out of that. You're going to get what you're owed, and that's death. So it can't be that way. That can't be God's program. God's program has always been rooted in the promise to Abraham, and it has to be prior to the law. But if you're going to go the law route, the reason why justification is apart from it is because all you're doing is tallying up transgressions against yourself.
They have the wrong epistemology. They're thinking about law, not about who Abraham was before the temporary measure of the law was installed.
Right.
It's kind of like thinking, think about who you were before you met your wife. It's like, I was a scumbag. I was this, I was this, I was this, I was this, I was this. But then I got married, and now I've changed my life. And now
I'm not improved because of their wives. I mean, yeah.
I don't know about you. Keep that to yourself, Pritchett. I'll speak it for myself.
Yeah. For those of us who are married, our wives have definitely made an improvement upon us. But speaking of
I
marriage,
mean,
I
yours
think,
tries. Mine has to really try. Oh my goodness. God bless her.
but speaking of marriage, to bring it back around to faith. Why is it, in your definition of faith, why is it that when we talk about being having faith in your spouse, is that based upon wishful thinking, or is it based upon your knowledge of your wife that gives you reason to be confident that when you're at work and your wife's at work, that she's going to be that word, or you're going to, if she has faith in you, that you're going to be faithful? That faithfulness has a performative element to it, not just merely mental.
I wouldn't say performed, I would say ethical. That faith is fundamentally ethical. That I trust on the basis of precedence. And I mean, I knew, for example, I knew my wife we got married in 2013. And so I knew her before 6 years before that, probably. You learn a lot about a person in 5 to 6 years. And plus we did the long distance thing. We did all that. And so I think I'm just speaking just for myself, but I think there is a sense in which learning through failure, learning through experience, learning through all the other stuff tells you if this person can be trusted.
Sure, but if you want to say ethical, that can put it back into the land of abstraction, as opposed to performative means living those ethics out.
Performance is abstract. Ethical, we all know what ethics mean. It's what you do literally every single moment.
Well, there's those who teach ethics, and then those who do, and those who do, and those who can't.
Those who can't do teach. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that's what the ethics professors. That's the class where that joke makes the most sense, not like your accounting class.
Yeah. Those who teach ethics rarely, if ever, live them out. Yeah.
Right. So there is a performative, a lived outness. If you don't like the word performative,
just say embodied. Embodied. There's an embodied reality.
It's lived out. I don't mean performative as in fake. I mean performative as in lived out.
Well, because I'm just waiting for a Calvinist to clip that and be like, see, he thinks he can save himself. It's brothers and sisters, chill.
No, because in verse 16 it says it may be in accordance with grace, and of course, grace in the ancient world, as we've hammered endlessly every week on this program, is reciprocal, right? Mm-hmm. And God gives you the means, the Holy Spirit, by which you can live out this ethic.
Mm-hmm.
So settle down and get grace right, because grace is not a metaphysical pixie dust that,
Well, I think that's where we get into the hope aspect of it too.
Right. Grace is economics.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Just like the wages and the works, the due, the payment that Paul already talked about in this chapter, that too is economics. When we get to chapter 6, he's going to talk about slavery. That too is economics. But grace is a patron-client reciprocity relational dance that the grace that God gives you must be met with the gratitude returned to God that is lived out and embodied in your daily life, promoting the honor of your patron and doing what he says.
So instead of perichoresis, we call it grace-choresis?
I'm okay with it.
Oh my gosh. Like, there's going to be one person in chat that gets that joke and they're going to send me hate mail.
Yeah.
And the thing is,
I deserve it.
Pritchett wasn't impressed.
That's just resting Pritchett face. We all understand that.
That deserves a... It's just a joke that didn't land. If there's one person who got it and they didn't laugh.
Hey, y'all in the chat, vindicate me right now through faithful allegiance to my jokes right now.
Tell me you give that lie to me. Weenie any validation whatsoever. He doesn't need it. He's got all the self-confidence in the world that joke will be laughed at.
I'm a pastor. I'm used to people not laughing at my jokes.
I got it, but you couldn't hear me laughing.
You're a good sport, Amber.
Amber is your one that you said would get it. And there might be 5 more people in the 700 to 1,000 people who watch this afterwards.
Anyone who's been to seminary and had a professor go, perichoresis is not the divine dance. It's like, yes, we understand that. Thank you. So.
Yeah. All right. So moving along here. You say that works has disappeared from the literary picture and the argument is centered on law, faith. I mean, when you say disappeared, we're talking about it was like, five,
It's
six.
moved to the back of the bus. Like it's at the back of the
I mean, it
moving
was
van.
there in verse 4. It was there, I mean.
Well, except for those who are going to equate law with works.
Which there's called this two different words thing, friends.
Yeah, I don't like that whole idea.
No.
Because Paul doesn't have an overall negative view of Torah here.
He doesn't have a negative view of works. He tells people to do good things all the time.
Well, he
literally
has a
screams at people who aren't doing good
He has
things.
a negative view of works of the Torah for justification. I think he has a negative view of works of Torah when someone thinks that's necessary in addition to faith.
I think has a negative view of works when it comes to identitarianism.
Right. We've hammered that point home in previous things. That's what I'm saying. He's like, okay, it works of the law. If you are a Jewish convert to Christianity and you just want to keep on being Jewish, but you not putting any stock in the fact that you're keeping kosher because it doesn't add anything to you over and above the Gentiles, go for it. Doesn't care. It's when you start thinking that does something that puts you at an advantage, or you think it is something that is required of all the Gentile converts to add on to their faith. That's where Paul is. I think it's adiaphora. I mean, Paul doesn't care if you still don't eat ham sandwiches. It's just don't think that does you any advantage. We have somebody who knows Greek better than Nick here.
Oh, hey.
Yeah. Joel. We love Joel. He's the Septuagint scholar.
I'm a fan of your work.
The one who has the patience of God dealing with Dr. White.
Yeah. Pretty close. Oh, and by the way, this is important. Nick got a nice haircut.
Mm-hmm.
I did it myself.
I don't. Nick has a shorter haircut. Amber is overselling the niceness of it. I'm not.
She didn't say that. She's just said I got a haircut. You're the one making me say stuff.
Yeah.
Nick got a haircut. I just said I got all of them cut.
Oh, okay. So. Oh, the text is small. I thought it said nice hair. I'm reading it. You're right. Nick got there was haircut on Nick's head.
And the beard too.
Yeah. But I mean, as a licensed barber, it's not a great haircut.
No, it's not, because it was free.
Right.
Although I did have to work for it, which means it cost everything.
All right. Off of Nick's hair. By the way, folks, I really technically am. I wasn't just a barber in a previous life. I continue to update my license with the State Board of Examiners in the state of Arkansas, even though I live in Indiana. I have been a licensed barber for 24 years.
I mean, Indiana, Arkansas, same thing.
If I ever visit Pritchett, I'm going to request one from him.
If you want to lose half an ear and look like an alley cat with that snipped up top, do it.
Oh, come on. I'm better than that.
Okay, fine. You'll walk out with a piercing on your right ear. So how did I get a tattoo on the back of my head? Don't ask what it says.
It's not a tattoo. It's just my edgers bled you.
My initials. Pritchett was here.
Speaking of the patience of God, I wonder if Joel knows that this honorary title.
It's Dr. Joel. Oh,
yeah.
I'm calling him Dr. Joel because, I mean,
he has a real doctorate.
Ritko. I don't really know how to say his last name correctly.
Koritko.
Okay.
That's how I've heard
nothing
it.
Personal. It's my ignorance.
Oh no! Just say it like you would say correct in an Arkansas accent, and it was Spanish. Correcto.
Well,
yeah, like Brad Pitt in Inglourious Basterds.
In an Arkansas accent, everyone forgives you for getting. He says no one knows how to say it.
Well, that's why my Twitter handle has the pronunciation on mine.
Yeah, but at least if we got yours wrong, we're talking about the greatest university in the state of Texas. So
Beeler. I know yours after being corrected about 100 times in the chat.
That's because you don't listen.
I know.
No, it's Braxton who continually, it's like, bro, how many times have we got to tell you?
Right. Anyway, there's going to be people getting upset that we're bantering again because they leave it in the comments.
Just consider it a breather for a second.
All right, so 16.
We don't want y'all to get overloaded in your brains because I know it happens to me too.
All right, so what's going on here in 16 through 21?
I don't know. That's why I wrote the PowerPoint for you.
Other than works disappearing from the literary picture and the argument is centered on law and faith. Well, we've kind of already talked about that, right? So,
Yeah.
Of faith. Where are you getting that?
Okay, so verse 16, I thought this was interesting. So I mean, obviously, it's goofy to me, but it also it's
You're not
simple,
happy
but
with the NASB, yes, we know.
I can't call it. I'll keep that to myself.
Right.
Yeah. So because of this, by faith.
Correctco. I'll still forget that.
Correctamundo.
Dr.
Right,
Correcto.
Pritchett?
I'll still forget it in
Correcto.
an hour. Thank you for that.
All right. So ek pisteos. So yeah, for this reason of faith. I just thought that was interesting. That's why I put that there.
So why does the NASB put the italics there for it is?
Because I mean, there's an implied estin or being verbs there. It's fine. I'm just gonna complain about.
Is an implied. Wait, what? You've got an Greek,
implied being verb.
I'm gonna have to check with Joel on this stuff because you're changing
estin. Like it's an implied estin verb or ime verb. It's like
the implied part. It's not written part though. No. So
I take back my comment about your Greek being as good as James White.
You should, because it's still betting on you.
Yeah, see, implied copula. Thank you. Like I'm just looking. I'm like, yeah, it's an implied copula or ime verb. Yeah, see, the guy who's smarter than me that should be on here instead of me thinks I'm right.
It's an older code, but it checks out. That's what. Sorry, Star Wars is just on our minds tonight because we have to reflect back to when Star Wars was actually good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
there's bait.
Yeah. So this is all more inclusive stuff. This is why I'm saying that it's not polemical. Not only to those who are of the law, saying not only meaning you guys, of course, at least the Jewish believers. But I don't understand your question here. Faith operative within law adherence. It would be operative within the law people that convert to Christianity, like Paul, but I don't understand. Is that what you mean?
Well, that's why there's a question mark there. Because I
go back to what I said earlier. I think now I don't know because y'all understand Paul better than I do because I like Peter because it's only Mark and 2 epistles to understand instead of like 13 different things. But plus what Luke says about him. I still say Paul would be. I would place him in the Ideaphora camp. Like, yeah, do that, but so he's like, you can be of faith and still keep doing. I mean, Paul did Jewish. You read in Acts, Paul went to the temple and did sacrifices because James talked him into it to try to settle down the Jews there, and of course a riot broke out anyway. But I mean, Paul still did that. He didn't like object and say, "No, I'm not doing it. I have faith now. I'm not going to go do this temple stuff." I mean, that's just weird. Admit it. It's weird.
I mean, everything's weird if you think about it.
Yeah. I mean,
we're on a planet right now. That's weird.
A spinning ball. But if you get circumcised, says Paul, you're going to be, you're taking the whole yoke of the law on yourself. So don't do that. And by the way, Timothy, we're gonna cut on you so that you're accepted. I mean, it's just you
right, go and say hi.
Hi.
Hey, Nugs. No one's the man. He probably understands.
Are you gonna go do mischief?
No.
Nick does.
No, I don't believe you.
Yeah. So what's this business about singular descendant?
Oh, I just thought it was interesting because I mean, Paul. I'd have to go back and look. Remember, Pritch, I did this like a week ago. Like, my memory's as bad as yours. I barely remember what I ate this morning. So, I just thought it was interesting that he used a singular. Is it a collective singular? All that sort of stuff. I was wondering if there was a sense of Yeah, I just thought that was interesting, and there's just little exegetical details. I'm like, oh, I wonder if that means anything. Probably not, but I'll put it there.
Well, it's interesting that seed is the Greek word, which is singular, yet the NASB
This is a family show. This is a family show.
I'll be careful.
Experiment.
But the NASB is translating it descendants, plural. So I find that an odd choice if it's a singular verb, or not verb, noun.
My sense, it's probably what's called a collective singular. There's not a ton of them, but you know.
Well,
Like
I mean,
the body of Christ.
the translators apparently thought so because they make it all plural anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So, or at least the NASB committee. I haven't looked at other English translations here, but yeah. And so and I'm guessing here that you're wanting to get rid of. You've never been on board with law court anywhere in Romans.
Not in Paul, no.
No, you mean nowhere in Paul?
Not at well. You have the judgment seat of Christ, but that's eschatological. That's not a judgment seat, or that's not a law court. So yeah, I would say.
Yeah, it's because you're wrong in Romans chapter 3, but that's fine. It's okay to be wrong.
Oh yeah, that's right. I forgot. The guy who couldn't debate his point just went, "You're wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong." Pulling the Dillahunty Dodge over here.
We have it on video. Quit trying to lie to people.
Oh, please go watch it, everyone.
Now you're calling your own character into question here.
Well, Nick,
I have no character. I just play one.
Nick, we had a really good
agreed.
We had a good discussion on justification before you popped in, and I was trying to remember because you don't think that in Paul justification is a legal term. What do you label it as?
Rectification.
Rectification, yeah, having kind of an emancipatory element or liberation kind of element or motif to it. Yeah.
Which I don't know. I don't know why you can't say that and. Right, because I mean, it clearly.
Well, because you go, it's this, and I have to go, it's also this, and then you go, oh, it's also that.
Everything.
Here's the thing. People do this all the time, and it annoys the living you know what out of me. People go, I believe this, and you're like, cool, but there's also this, and you go, well, I believe that too, and it's like, but you didn't say that. You didn't start with that. You know, it's like the provisionists and Calvinists complaining about each other. You know, It's like, whoa, you're believing. It's like, oh, we believe that too, and it's like, oh, but you didn't begin with that. We didn't have that conversation, so now we have to have a different conversation because now we're not talking about what's going on.
I feel like I'm the person who gets to say it's both, because like if you guys argue over what something means, I get to sit here in the middle and be like, it's probably a little bit of both. You know, that's
so you can be Pritchett's imaginary law court lawyer and adjudicate what is going on.
Yeah, but I'm still in that camp, but I'm going to add the fact that just because you can take a law court term, I mean, you can do all kinds of fun things with that word group for righteousness, just dikaios, sune, all that. You can have all kinds of fun with that, but I'm still in the law courts fine. But like I said, I think as far as this legal contract question mark here, no, I think this language is relationality. That's what I think is going on in chapter 4, because there's so much familial language that Paul is trying to. This is kinship language. When you talk about heirs, okay, so you've got patronage language here in verse 16, but you also have this idea of kinship, or if you want to say fictive kinship, with this descendant language, this heir language. That's all, I would say, kinship, but relationality. That's basically kinship, right? I mean, this is what's really at the heart of this is new lineage, are being connected to that lineage.
Yeah, singular. We have one Father, as Jew and Gentile.
Yeah, see last week's thumb where we sang the song. Yeah. So I mean, I think when we don't pay attention to the language of descendants, we don't take a close. What does it mean to be an heir, right? We kind of skipped over that in the last section in verse 14. But this is all familial language, right? And I think that just to tie it back into the broader theme, this is the unity language, because I mean, sure, we've joked about it enough that Paul wants money for Spain, but this is that unity language that Paul is trying to unite his audiences, right? Because he's got a majority Gentile, I think we all agreed, but yet sizable minority Jewish audience, and putting them all, evoking this, we're all descendants. We're all, everyone of faith is a descendant. Everyone of faith is the eschatological heirs. This is uniting language. That's why I think it's relationality that's to the forefront, even if law court language is sprinkled in through here.
See, if you're going to agree to that, then you don't need law court, because law court has no explanatory power, because you and I agree. Relationality is at the forefront, or is that's just what Paul's talking about. He doesn't have to have, you don't need this law court sprinkling over the top.
That a word that is used to evoke one thing can't be used in other contexts, and I don't think that that's the case. That's not how language works.
Well, you're the one arguing for the addition of law court stuff. I'm saying, I'm agreeing with you. Relationality about covers it. You're the one going, oh, but we got to have this law court over here. I got to have lawyers and Michael Cohen and Elena Abba and all this lawyer stuff. It's like, come on, Pritchett.
Okay, but if I use a word like contract, right, that's going to evoke the imagery of business, even if I'm using contract as in a handshake with my buddies.
Well,
right?
But what's the contract based on? What's the fundamental metaphoric reality of it? Relationship.
Well, but if you go back to Romans 3, it's also mercy and forgiveness. I mean, you guys went on forever about mercy seat business. So, I mean, that's still, law court, but
mercy seat is not a law court.
I mean, here I am. I've bashed Luther for 16 weeks in a row, and I'm still like, yeah, it is a declaration of I don't like the acquittal language, but I do like. Oh,
is that too law courty? Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, but there's like I said, it's all about what kind of categories you have. Are you thinking in modern contemporary Western things? Are you thinking about, ancient first century terms? So how does that imagery play? Same thing with grace. I mean, we talk about grace again, like a metaphysical pixie dust when it's economic language. So go figure.
That's just what we do. We're called nitpickers.
Okay, so you highlighted perform here. What do you want us to think about this?
It just goes to show that I have the gift of omnipotence and omnipresence and all knowledge.
You have the gift of forgetting what you wanted to highlight.
No, I have a gift of preempting and knowing what you would say. So I predestined perform to be used here and for you to use that term. But then again, yeah, I don't remember anything I put here because I did this last week and I've constructed a sermon and 2 Bible studies in between that time. I don't remember any of this. So I'm seeing this for the new time, or the first time, it feels like.
Well, if you can take notice of your PowerPoint, it has something to do with verse 21.
Well, the problem is my screen is very pixelated and I can't quite read
so
it.
God,
verse 21.
Abraham was confident what God had promised that he would be able to perform, deliver, whatever. This is about God being able to deliver. This goes back to what we were talking about. Faith as based on prior precedent gives you confidence for the future, for your allegiance that your patron will deliver as promised based upon the evidence that he has delivered in the past. Right. So
looks good to me.
In the case of Abraham, we talked earlier about in the ancient Near Eastern context, the deity shows up to have a conversation with you, you pay attention, right?
Mm-hmm. Or at least you should. Woe to you who don't.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Well, I think talking about the hope of the future sets up really well the next chapter, because the word hope is used 3 times in Romans 5:2-5. So,
yeah, next week is when the fun begins.
Oh, we're going to spend an hour on textual criticism.
Yeah, next week is where all the fun begins. People would say that Romans 5 through, if you're of the Nick persuasion, you're going to say that Romans 5-8 is the heart of the matter. And
I'm not Douglas Campbell. Stop.
Okay. Well,
be nice.
I think you're smarter than he is.
That is not true.
Okay, you're more correct than he is by far.
I'll take that.
You're more correct than Douglas Campbell's weird idea.
I'm taller than him. I'll go with that. Probably.
You're taller than most people. You're like what, 6'2"?
I'm 6 foot, but I look taller than that.
Yeah, Braxton's 6 foot, and he looks shorter than that. So
Yeah.
he looks shorter than me when we used to be sitting side by side in the old Trinity radio studio. Everyone thought I was taller than Braxton because I actually have good posture, and he has terrible posture.
Well, you were also that was Fat Pritchett too, and Fat Pritchett just fills a room.
Fair enough.
Handsome Pritchett, well, commands our attention.
There you go. Somebody's got to be eye candy for the stream. Come on. Of course.
What was all this?
No, it's really Derek. It's not either of us. So
yeah, Derek, take your shirt off. That's what Pritchett wants.
Sure.
I mean,
okay. Let's finish this chapter out so these people can be done with our nonsense. Ron says, I spent a lot of time in Romans 5-8 myself. I mean, for some, and I think there's legitimacy here. 5-8 kind of gives us the underpinning for, especially, I mean, 5 kicks off what 8 rounds out and kicks us back to the start of 5 again. There is an inclusio there that I don't deny. So it is a perfect little section in and of itself that has a lot of meat to it. And so, but because Paul is a bit long-winded, you have to spend a lot of time taking it.
Be nice. He's an apostle. Show some respect.
I mean, Jude made his point on a page. Okay, I'm just saying.
Yeah, but Jude also makes. Well, I'll keep that.
The brother of the Messiah was able to be. I mean, brevity, and wit and all of that. But anyway, all right.
I mean, anyway, you don't have to deal with Gentiles, so that's the issue. They're Gentiles like me would just take a long. It just doesn't land. See the law court imagery and issues we had in chapter 3.
We can drag it. We can do Jude next and drag that show out for about.
I say we do the
10 to 14
pastorals.
episodes.
I say we do the pastorals and spend 6 weeks on authorship because that's just what the people want.
Yeah, well, you're the Fuller guy. You didn't believe authorship until I, had to rein you in.
Oh, I didn't even know you until like 5 minutes ago. I still don't know your last name.
What's the first sentence of 1 Timothy? That's who wrote it. Shut up. God inspired that. Get over it. Right? I mean, that's my, the
James White would be proud.
Well, I mean, he has said on record 6 years ago that he wasn't impressed with regards to me.
I remember that.
Yeah. Well, it made the old intro to Trinity Radio, right? I was not impressed. Then he didn't respond to anything in my opening statement and skipped straight to my rebuttal where at that point I just thought that our opponents were a joke. But to this day, I've only had one person engage with my opening statement that was a Calvinist, and he didn't understand a tenth of it, which is normal because this is why I have a hard time even talking to my Provisionist and Arminian friends, is because I'm like, you guys really don't understand anything about the Bible. You don't really understand. You start talking about patron client respect, they don't know what to do with that. They're like, no, grace is a metaphysical pixie dust that God sprinkles on people.
No, Pritchett, it's not pixie dust. It's a superpower.
Superpower. Well, free will is apparently a super. Everything's a superpower.
Dude, there was a Calvinist on Twitter recently that is like, yes, free will is a superpower if it were true. I'm like,
you know what is the closest thing to superpower is the charismatic gifts. Why don't we just call it? Why is it so hard to figure out? Why don't
if that's the case, then Benny Hinn is basically Superman.
I'm the only person who actually refers to the charismatic gifts as superpower, and I'm a charismatic, and I'm like, that's what you use that language for, right? Speaking in tongues is a superpower. It's the closest thing we could ever get to it.
Holy spirited charisma.
I can't even speak in tongues, but.
No, but you speak Arkansas, and that's pretty close.
Close enough. I'm getting there. All right.
Sound like Boomhauer after a bender.
We're just counting the running time here, guys. Let's get back to verse 22.
It always goes long when I'm on. You had a short one last time when I wasn't here.
Yeah, that's true.
Camera loves me.
I just read an article on patronage and brokerage language in John 15 in my previous debate prep, and it was probably excellent. You should read, I can't remember his name, is an Australian scholar who does a whole thing on the John 1 in the language of patronage in John 1. Patronage and kinship language in John 1. It is a phenomenal paper.
Francis Maloney?
No.
Brendan Byrne? Because he does stuff in John.
No, I will I'm not gonna. I could turn off my camera and go look it up, but let me go look at it. But y'all have to start talking about Romans verse 22.
Okay, so I'll kick it over to you, Derek, because you're smarter than me. Verses 24 through 25, the big language, the big, for ours also, and I'm reading from the NRSV updated. It'll be reckoned to us who believe in him who raised Jesus our Lord from the dead, who was handed over for our trespasses and was raised for our justification. And game recognized faith. Oh my gosh, I must have been hopped up on way too much coffee writing that. Anyway,
I smiled at that one.
Yeah,
Tim McBride's Grace for Grace, patronage in the prologue to John's Gospel by Tim McBride. It's only
he's at Morling, I think, or was it Morling?
It's only $4.95 on Kindle, and I read the thesis version, the PDF that was free that I found online. But it is phenomenal read. Tim McBride, Grace for Grace, patronage in the prologue of John.
All right, who handed Jesus over? There we go. That was something because I thought Wes was going to be here and be like, God didn't do it because God wouldn't do that stuff. But also I just throw that there because
what is your thing with this stuff? I mean,
because I'm doing the nose thing.
Stick the nose up in the air as an elitist snob. Oh
yeah.
Then I embrace every time you did that when I spoke. I freely admit I'm an elitist snob.
That's why I was doing it.
Look at my bookshelves. Snob. I watched Downton Abbey. Snob.
I work out 6 times a week. Snob.
Based.
Well, these are free range games.
No, I work out 6 times a week. That's far right. Remember, exercise makes you right wing.
Did you work out today?
There's an article on that.
Oh, okay. Before we get derailed, who handed it? That's all, folks. Jesus over.
I mean, I thought long and hard about that, and the conclusion I came to was God, because I feel like to hand something over implies that it's yours to give.
He's trying to run us afoul of the new law that passed in the House.
No, I was trying to get Wes all soyed up, because of his anti-PSA-isms. I'm kidding, obviously. God bless you, Wes. I hope you feel better. I'll pray for you. But I just was interested. I was like, oh, who handed him over? And I was like, well, it's, if I recall, and I could look it up, I guess. I can't remember what the verb is. Give me 1 sec. I mean, I know what the verb is, but was hand.
I could have swore Acts 2:23 said, like Peter said the Jews did, but he doesn't actually say they.
And we just got demonetized.
Oh yeah, I forgot. That's. Yep.
Well, okay. Here's what Porter says, and I
Herod
noticed this too.
and Pontius Pilate, along with the Gentiles and the peoples of Israel, all of the above.
So, we can't get canceled if we say the state handed him over. There we go. But here it is. The agent is unspecified
and the peoples of Israel. It was everybody.
Yeah, but the
do
word
whatever
handed.
your hand. Listen, Leighton Flowers, since you don't understand, right? Is it channel my inner James White? Whatever your hand and your purpose predestined to occur.
Is that Acts 4?
Yeah.
Predestined to occur is tautological, so it seems kind of weird that Paul or Acts or whoever wrote that would be.
Orzo means to schedule, to arrange.
Okay, well,
like I'm orizoing myself to eat dinner later.
Right. I mean, I predestine. It's not a super duper word. I predestine stuff all day long. In Plutarch's Moralia, they predestine times to have conversations, a free inquiry.
I mean, this live stream was predestined.
You go to any Greek translation, and Joel, Dr. Correcco will back me up on this. You go to Hackett translations of Plutarch or anything. When they come across like Plutarch, a contemporary of Paul writing in Koine Greek, by the way, they translate it arrange or furnish.
I think
I just call it the ancient.
They don't use the word predestined. That comes from the Latin. Translated from pro orzo. That doesn't into the English predestined. We're bantering and people are going to start, freaking out and throwing a hissy fit. So you can just say whatever God scheduled.
I just call it the ancient biblical equivalent of meal prep. Now we can move on.
Right, there you go. I mean, that's not to mean well, number one, it's a verb. Predestined is a verb. Predestination implies a noun with a theological baggage, which is nowhere in the Bible.
You're right. Let me be more to meal prep. There we go. Now it's a verb.
Thank you. Predestined, the verb, is in the Bible 6 times, and it's 4 times in 2 chapters.
Pritchett, who handed Jesus over?
Well, you see, because
Herod and Pilate to do the thing that God had scheduled in advance to occur.
well, let me do something right now that I haven't done yet. Let me do
something. A loaded word. I'm not going to use them. You marked out beforehand to occur.
Let me do something I have yet to do on
being
one of
the
these.
thing.
Shut up, Pritchett. Let the man
Not
speak. He's better looking than both of us.
fiction.
Pritchett, I'm gonna do something I have yet to do on one of these streams, and
Those are the useful idiots that did it.
I'm gonna push back on you.
Okay.
Ew.
Because I looked at
Phrasing.
I looked at Acts 4 whenever I was thinking about this question, and it says that they assembled together against your holy servant Jesus, whom you anointed, to do whatever your hand and your will had predestined to take place. So
what you can
is
say
it really saying that
literally it's your hand in the great many.
I was getting
to occur. This multi-great you predestined to occur. This multi-great is the only way I could. I was looking at this text once. I was like, how do you your hand in this multi
synecdoche,
this multi-great that you predestined to this multi. It's plural, so you're like, what do I do with this? It's
multifaceted.
Well, faceted. No,
you're flattening it out.
Faceted would mean takes away from the multiple greatness of it. That's what he's trying to say. This multiple great thing. This
omnimeganess of the
omnimeganess.
So would we say that God handed him over through the means of Herod and the Gentiles and Pilate and not the Gentiles, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There we go. There. You see, that's my concession. It's both. It's not one or the other. It's God did it through these means. There you go. That's a Leighton Flowers way.
Yeah, your hand of purpose to do whatever your hand is multi-great predestined to occur. This
omnimeganess.
Omnimeganess.
Yeah, somebody. Nick put it in. I was about to say somebody put it in the chat. It was Nick.
Yeah. Omnimeganess, predestined to occur. So it's like this multi-great, world-shaking thing, right? But it's just like if you look at it, it's just like this. Your hand and this purpose, all this language is just multiple omnimeganess. And so, what was predestined to occur? The crucifixion of Christ. These were the useful idiots that were gathered together to pull off that thing for God. That's not determinism here. And predestined doesn't mean you can insert metaphysical determinism. It was just these were the idiots that did the thing that God had determined would occur, which is the crucifixion. So I don't.
And had they known, they wouldn't have done it, according to what Paul literally says.
Yeah, had they known, and 1 Corinthians, that's right. Had they known what they did, they would not have crucified the Lord of mercy. Yes, exactly. So I mean, if they had, if they had omniscience in the Molinist sense, and had counterfactual knowledge, they wouldn't have done this. But anyway, that's overreading what God had scheduled to happen.
Raised for our justificationisms.
Right. You see, when I read that, I knew Pritchett was going to have fun with that.
Right.
So go ahead, Pritchett, have fun.
Right. Justification by resurrection alone? No, because
then nobody's justified unless you count Jesus,
which
I'm actually okay with.
Justified by the resurrection of Christ alone, because you were justified by His blood, according to Paul. You were also justified by His grace, according to Paul. All in the same thing, and you're justified by faith and not by works of the law, and you're justified by the resurrection. So that's 4 things in one book. That you're justified by faith alone is a slogan, not a doctrine.
That should be your first book, Justified by.
Justified by 5 things. 4 things
just
justified in the same
by
book.
That's it.
And 1 thing, and then of course it's a rehash of what he said in Galatians about apart from works of the law. And then James says this curious thing. He says you're justified by works and not by faith alone over in James 2. And people have all sorts of fun with that. That's hardly convincing. But I don't like the Catholic take on it either. So go watch my take on it on Trinity Radio Extra. I mean, my thing has to do with the kind of faith you're talking about. You talk about a dead, workless faith that doesn't justify it, which means if that's your understanding of faith, it makes a lot of sense to say if a dead, workless faith can't save you, that's the preemptive. That's the question James opens his discourse. If that case, what can you? A working faith. Which means that if you have a wrong understanding of faith, it's okay to say you're justified by works, because that's exactly what James says to people who have a deficient version of understanding of faith. So James is happy to say, yeah, I mean, justified by word, yeah, not by faith alone. Fool,
Because faith is embodied ethics. Faith is embodied ethics.
right. So yeah, you're justified by faith apart from works of the law. You're justified by grace. You're justified by the resurrection. You're justified by the blood, and you're justified by works and not by faith alone. For those of you who don't understand what faith is, it's not hard, but it also makes Reformation slogans annoying because they don't make any sense. Because alone means singular one thing. Here's 4 things in the book of Romans so far that are justification. And then there's one thing over there in James that nobody likes to deal with. Anyway, yes. But what does that mean? The resurrection had to happen for justification to be possible for anyone, which means that the blood, the crucifixion, and the resurrection are both necessary components for God to rectify, according to Nick Quinton, the apocalyptic weenies, anybody.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I understand it.
I don't have much to add to that.
Yeah, I could nitpick, but I think I'm okay with it.
No, nitpick. We've got about 15 more minutes. Nitpick.
Oh my gosh.
He was delivered or handed over because of our wrongdoings. He was delivered by whom? We want to say God.
I have no problem saying God, because I think, God presented Christ as the mercy seat. And so actually, if that is correct, God presented or handed or displayed, depending on how you take the verb there, Christ, God, Christ.
Displayed. I mean, that's kind of, I like that language.
I'm trying to be fair to the nuances of the verb. Huh? I'm trying to be nuanced with how the verb can be rendered. So Christ is displayed or presented or put forth in Romans 3:25 as the mercy seat. And then here you have basically the culmination of what it means to be the mercy seat that all of this has been working towards, that was told about in Romans 1, designated Son of God empowered by resurrection from the dead. Yeah, resurrection is the centralized motif of all that Paul will talk about, because resurrection defeats death, it defeats sin, and it unites in embodied faithful life Jew and Gentile who are at war with one another. So it's a resurrection is ecclesiological, interpersonal, and eschatological, i.e. apocalyptic.
Yes, so but this is also said. You point out justification and life prepared together in Romans 5:18, but in Romans 5:10, this is a precursor to that as well. The raise for justification. How much more will we be saved?
Through him, yeah,
by his life.
Mm-hmm.
People put all of the salvation chips in their theology onto the cross, where Paul does the exact opposite.
The cross means nothing without the empty tomb. Thus, the empty tomb is everything. Everyone who died on a cross stayed dead, except for that one time with that one guy. And that is why the resurrection, here's the thing that I tell people.
The cross reconciles. We'll get to this next week.
We'll get there. But the resurrection, without the resurrection, you have no New Testament in which to argue over. These documents would not have been written if Jesus Christ was not raised from the dead.
Well, and Paul says exactly that.
Yep. And so that is why resurrection is the quintessential thing that binds literally everything we believe about history, ethics, life, and the future together. And also ethics and embodiedness. Mm-hmm. So resurrection is literally Paul's life. And I no longer live. Christ lives in me. And that's not some esoteric metaphysical thing. Because Christ is raised, I now not only have hope for tomorrow, but I know how to live today in hope of tomorrow. That changes your world, and that'll preach.
So what would you say in this specific verse 25 context he's aiming at with the justification and the resurrection? Do you think it's all of those things here too? Or
yeah, we kind of get to it next week. I mean, in Romans 5:9,
he's preempting next week, but he's not preempting next week. He's preempting
justified
what
by
follows.
The blood, and you're justified by the resurrection. You're justified by the blood next week. what is that, 5:9? And how much more, having been reconciled, how much more will we be saved by? So you get justification, reconciliation, and salvation. So justification is dependent on both the death and the resurrection, right?
And one of the issues we have in Protestantism, and I'll get everyone mad at me now, when we sever justification from sanctification, that's like severing faith from ethics. These two things are meant to go together. These two things are meant to be intertwined. They are distinct, they are different, but they're not identical. But they are meant to be interrelated to the point where you pull them apart, you don't have anything worth talking about.
I think Leroy Forlines parsed that pretty well, if I'm thinking the right author.
That sounds about him. I mean, I kind of wrote stuff like that in that trashy little book I wrote that one time. But
that's true.
Since you outed me last time, I tried to put code in the chat. Just talk while I go to the bathroom.
Well,
I'll just say it out loud.
Joel has a really good question if you see it in the chat.
Where is it? Let's see. What if the resurrection... Okay, so what if the resurrection is the bringing of the blood, i.e. life, to the heavenly tabernacle to complete the hilasterion offering? Blood has to be brought to the Holy of Holies for forgiveness. Okay.
I mean, that sounded really good. That's why I was like, I kind of want to hear that spoken to.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting.
Well,
I mean, if you tie, I mean, the mercy seat, of course, has the priestly element of it. And basically, if that's true, and I think that's at least substantially true, then you have basically Paul writing something that Hebrews then spends, 13, 14 chapters on? And he spends, 6 verses on it?
Mm-hmm.
And so you have kind of a nice little biblical theology of both priesthood, but also of sacrifice, but also of resurrection, also of exaltation, and also of ethics. I mean, Hebrews, for all the talk about priestliness is deeply a deeply ethical vision. And that's why apostasy is such a big issue in Hebrews. That is why clinging to Christ is such a big issue. And so, yeah.
I like that. Yeah, because it adds another layer, because I was kind of like the death on the cross was taking care of the debt, but almost like the resurrection was the vindication of the satisfaction of it. And so that adds like another element to how I was thinking of it going into this.
Well, and it spells hope for people who've never, at that time, and we have this time now, when you have Christ being the nexus of faith and the object of faith, then you don't have to go to a temple in order to access forgiveness. You don't have to worry about that, because wherever you pray, wherever you are embodied in faith and allegiance to Christ, Christ is present with you, and so it kind of places a whole lot of problems on other stuff by missing that. But if Christ is the mercy seat by which we access through faith, then you don't have an issue, because you have a true biblical universalism there, where you have the cosmic scope of Christ's blood being literally shed upon the altar of the entire world, for the whole world. So again, you have an argument for, I would call it a universal atonement, or a universal death for the world, so to speak.
I mean, that sounds like exactly what John talks about in 1 John 2.
Mm-hmm. And 1 John 1, or John chapter 1, the Lamb of God, tying again, lamb, blood, death, sacrifice, resurrection, who takes away or destroys the sins of the world, the cosmos. So not just limited to the land or to the earth, but to what if there are principalities and powers in need of reconciliation? Although, and you can also get political. What about ideologies?
Mm-hmm.
If cosmos is the world full of sin, and there are sinful ideologies in the world that need to be captive, and epistemologically so, then you can have epistemological regime change where ideologies are reconciled with Christ. That Christ puts to death the ones that need to die and reconciles the ones where there was hostility.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and by the way, Dr. Koretko, if you're still in the audience, which you have honored us with your presence. I don't imagine why you've hung around this long, but he
must be so angry with us, all the stupid stuff we're saying.
My employee Leighton Flowers, there's a standing in. We do this on Monday nights. We used to do it on Thursday nights. Now we do it on Monday nights. We're going through the book of Romans. You have a standing invite. I can loop you in on our chat thing. If you would like to send me a DM on Twitter, I know we've corresponded in the past on that. If you want to be looped in, you can get the invite every Monday night. You can ignore it as often as you like, but if you ever get another free Monday night, you can just click that link and
Please
hop
come
on
on my YouTube channel. Please come on my YouTube channel. Dude, that'd be so much fun.
We're way cooler. We're not as big as Latent Flowers channel, but we're a lot cooler. And our people will actually follow you and watch your videos because this is the nerdy channel, obviously. But yeah, if you don't want to, then just say no thanks in a message or whatever. But you can come and go as you please, and you can stay for 5 minutes or the whole show if you want to, and argue with Nick and Derek, but agree with me on everything. So or not, I don't care.
Also, MJ's back.
Yeah, MJ showed back up for the most important part of the show, though. This is the part where we talk about the so what. You're standing not a bunch. You didn't just read 30 commentaries for no reason. You actually have to do something with this. You have to talk about this with other people in your small group, in your church, from the pulpit, whatever. What's the so what about this passage? Don't everybody speak at once.
I really thought you were directing that towards MJ.
Yeah, no, MJ left, so he's got to come on.
You're muted.
You're muted.
The Christian Nationalist got to your thing, dude.
I see you testing my sanctification.
It's got to be tested.
All right. Where we at in this? I literally just hopped on.
Where the rubber meets the road. What does this mean for the life of the church and our lives as Christians? But I repeat myself.
Well, number one, well, it's not number one. This is more like a sidebar. We were talking about the Reformation. And I think one of the things that it means is Paul did not have the same concerns as Martin Luther. Martin Luther had pastoral concerns concerning his sanctification. But here we are pointed to the example of Abraham and what true faith looks like, and what God, what truth faith looks like in response to God's gracious actions and his gracious promises. And so this is a reminder to the church to always take hold of the promises of God, and that we can rest assured that God is able to keep his word, just like our ancestor in the faith, Father Abraham. Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, my thing is, and we didn't really touch on this portion of it a lot, but as far as like Abraham being old, as good as dead, right? And let's not leave out Sarah, right? I mean, she busted out laughing at the thought of having a child, so we can't neglect that. But
yeah, I mean, their junk wasn't working, so to speak.
Well, that's why I laughed earlier when Richard talked about performance.
Yeah. Come on. Keep it PG now. Keep it PG. But yeah, so Sarah, the deadness of her womb.
Ew.
When you think about Abraham willing to sacrifice Isaac upon the altar, right? He had to have a belief in resurrection if he had done it, because this was the child of promise. And, we probably get into this more in Romans 9 than we would now. But there is something here in this idea of the deadness of Sarah's womb is evoking the Ishmael, Isaac, that whole ordeal to bring about Isaac, in which the seed will be designated or named or called, if we want to use that. So there is a sense of Abraham's faith in resurrection here, because had he not been stopped, Isaac would have been slaughtered on the altar, and yet he was the fulfillment of the promise to Abraham about the father of many nations. He was the one that would have the blessing, all of that. So Abraham had to have some sense of this, I think. And I think Paul's echoing that here, that whole story, to echo that, which leads into this idea of resurrection. So I think that that's kind of the faith element, that God is the giving life to the dead and calling things into existence that did not exist. Right. This is the God that you have faith in, as Abraham did, which is why the universality of God's redemptive program is inclusive, not exclusive. And I think that needs to be highlighted, because this is a resurrection passage. This is a faith and resurrection passage more than it is a faith and atonement passage. And you look at how much resurrection plays in Paul's thought. We'll get into more of that even next week with flickers of atonement. Atonement is not quite as the focus as the resurrection. Like when Paul says in 1 Corinthians to preach Christ and him crucified, chapter 15 goes on and says, and was buried and rose again, and then goes on about the resurrection appearances and all that. So even then, the crucifixion still evokes the resurrection, or there's no point, like you were talking about earlier, Nick, there's no point in talking about a crucified Messiah unless he rose from the dead. And so I think resurrection is more prominent in Paul's thought than crucifixion. Would you agree with that?
Undoubtedly.
Okay, so that's not a controversial hot take here. This is just,
I mean, it might be, but I don't.
Depends on how interested you are in arguing about the scope of the atonement. Outside of that debate, resurrection is Paul's theme, even though he said, I don't want to know anything about you. People take that as if the crucifixion, well, and then 1 Corinthians 11, of course, we proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. Well, he can't come unless he raised from the dead as well. So to me, it seems like resurrection is even implied at every mention of the crucifixion.
Mm-hmm.
At least it would be for Paul. And if we don't talk about resurrection and we only talk about atonement and death of Jesus, then we can have a dead Jesus. And I think that leads to a dead church or a dead faith. So I would highlight all of these aspects of resurrection and life and the God who gives life to the dead as kind of the main thrust if I was teaching this passage and, preaching from it in a pulpit or teaching it from a small group or Sunday school class context or Bible study or whatever. That's kind of my focus.
I would emphasize God's understanding of history, God's awareness of history, God seeing history, and his capacity to redeem history. That Abraham's story, if left to its own devices, would end in death or the termination of all things, and the promise would be broken, and so on and so forth. But Paul, and through the resurrection of Christ, we can look back through exile, through the failure of kings, the failure of David, Abraham, all the way back to the garden, into death, to the origin of death and sin themselves. And I think I would really emphasize the redemption of history is often as beautiful as God raising his son from the dead as it is having a 4-year-old son jump around behind me making all sorts of little noises. That history is itself redeemable, and that's why God raised Jesus from the dead, to redeem all the things that we are going through. Is that right, son?
Hey, I'm with our Calvinist Reformed brethren about the kids making noise in church instead of being shoveled off into the background. I'm all for it.
Oh no, it's holy mischief. I preach better when I hear no in the background. I'm like, oh, that's right.
Yeah, Nugs is the real eye candy of the program anyway. Not Derek, not me.
Not so loud. Not so loud.
It never was. Nick was never in the running.
Bye.
Hey,
Goodbye.
goodbye.
Gentle.
Bye.
There you go. Hey, how old are you?
4.
Mm-hmm.
How old?
How old?
5.
Are you 5 or 4?
5.
You are a little mischievous kid who's going to destroy everything.
How old
This
is
is why you
that?
have kids. Hey,
How old are you? Nolan.
how old are you? He can't hear you. I got headphones in. You're 4?
Oh, wow. It's been 4 years.
Don't say that. You're going to make me feel old. All right, son. Hop
And
on
we're
down.
finishing
He
Romans
was
4.
born when I was 43 and I'm 47. It's like he was born yesterday.
Yeah, but you look like you're 47. Oh my gosh.
You look like you're 47 too, buddy.
This is true. Yeah.
You
Okay,
don't look that much older than me. Or
I'm
that
grayer
much
than
younger
you are.
me. Yeah. All right, Derek, bring us home.
Well, I would, since this is the end of chapter 4, I would kind of bring in a little bit that was already talked about in the previous week. Abraham stands an example, righteousness by faith, as he was declared such without the law. He has promised to be the one through whom all the nations would be blessed. Abraham carried the seed promise, and Abraham believed the seed promise is fulfilled in Jesus Christ, through whom all nations are blessed by obtaining a righteousness that is through faith. Abraham both prefigured and fathered the promise of a righteousness through faith. And then I would get into Jesus Christ, the man Christ Jesus bore the debt of sin and was raised for our justification. That's kind of how the chapter ends there. And I would camp out there for a while because, he was raised for our justification by which we have hope. And I really like to talk about the hope because we've already talked about it in this broadcast. History teaches hope. I would talk about how Paul is using Abraham for such a purpose as that, looking back into the past so that we can have hope for the future, faith in God and his promises. I mentioned Psalm 77, and there's a lot of other Psalms where the author is looking back, like at times they're turmoil, even feeling abandoned by God, but they look back at an event like the Exodus. I mean, throughout the Old Testament, they look back at the Exodus all the time to renew their faith in God and his covenant promises and in his deliverance. So I'll talk about that, but also the hope that we have. I really like Colossians 1, where he says that your faith and love have arisen from the hope laid up for you in the gospel. Or your faith and love have arisen from the hope laid up for you, which you heard about in the gospel. So the hope that we have in resurrection, glorification, the revelation of Christ in the eschaton, and then close it out by talking about the importance of sanctification and the other side of faith, which is sometimes neglected, which I like Michael Heiser's term, the believing loyalty. So it is a faith that will be walked out in loyalty, fidelity to God and the works that he has laid out for us.
Yeah, Bates uses believing allegiance. So it's kind of believing loyalty, allegiance, kind of similar. But I think it's stressing that I'm kind of on board with that whole project because it fits well within what I was reading from the context group guys. So yeah, I think that's an important thing when this term faith comes about, that we have to drill down on what that actually means, as opposed to what, from my apologetics background, what the atheists like R and Raw want to throw out there. Oh, faith is believing outside of evidence. Not that, Kierkegaard didn't help in in that aspect.
Yes.
But I mean, you've got that, but you also have Christians that sometimes, with a misunderstanding of Hebrews 11:1, sort of buy into that whole thing and take that as a talking point, as well-meaning as they are, trying to think that that's the proper way to understand that verse. It kind of gets out there that faith is something that is, one, primarily intellectual and abstract, and two, something not based on anything that you can confirm. And so we've got to highlight that thing. And I think between the four of us, you can get a decent sermon out of all the things that we'd all emphasize.
Mm-hmm.
So MJ, what do you got coming up on your YouTube channel, Urban Christian Institute?
I'm going to be choosing violence. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on in politics. There's a lot of stuff going on within Christian apologetics circles that I might wake up one day and it rub me the wrong way. and I have to pray about it before I hit the go live button.
I can guess.
Yeah, I mean, and then of course I got things I got to take care of for you, boss. So, but we'll see. We'll see. Adam Coleman will be coming on the channel next month, and there
Nice.
was,
Adam Coleman I think he turns 40 something ish today. I don't
44.
remember. 44.
Yep.
We want to wish Adam Coleman a very happy birthday.
Amen.
Because he is a friend of ours and we love him to death. More than Nick. So, yeah. Even Nick loves Adam more than Nick. So
yeah, and I hate myself, so that doesn't say much.
Oh,
Adam will be coming on the channel, and Chris will also be coming on the channel, and I'll be talking about something other than politics.
Yeah, we need Adam to come on Monday nights because we need more apologists to show up instead of Bible nerds.
Yeah,
Derek, you're an occasional YouTuber who needs to produce more content because I think your content's fantastic. So, you got anything coming up for us?
Well, you asked me a few weeks ago, and I said I had 2 videos coming up, and I accidentally deleted those, so I never posted them. So at some point, I'm going to get around to redoing them. I wasn't that happy with them anyway, but one's fitness related, one's just kind of for fun. And
yeah, I'm all for fitness content. By the way, if you didn't know, I also have I'm not just a Trinity Radio extra guy. I have a Theology Geek Fitness YouTube channel on fitness. It's a passion of mine, so go subscribe to that.
I'm into fitness too. I'm totally into fitness.
Help me to
get these donuts in my mouth.
Yeah. Help me to get to 1,000 subscribers. I'm at 930 at Theology Geek Fitness. So y'all help me get to 1,000.
Yeah,
you don't have to watch any videos. I don't care. I just want to get monetized.
I watched your video today of your current eating habits.
Yeah, they haven't changed. That's the thing. So I have to keep reminding people. Just eat the same stuff every day.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
I flirted with the idea of eating eggs and tuna fish.
Hard-boiled eggs and tuna fish.
Oh, so you don't scramble them? I thought I saw you scramble them and put that Frank's Red Hot on there.
The Frank's Red Hot is the way to go. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. Tuna fish and Frank Red Hot is way better than you think it sounds.
I literally ate that out of a can before this broadcast started.
That combination?
Yeah, Frank's Red Hot and tuna.
Yeah. Now, I added scrambled eggs, but I realized that hard-boiled eggs actually taste better in that concoction. So just like a normal tuna salad, just put hard-boiled eggs, tuna, drain the water, never tuna in oil, tuna in water, drain it, and put a hard-boiled egg in there, and then Frank's Red Hot. It is phenomenal and cheaper than a protein bar with the same amount of grams of protein in it. 26 some odd grams of protein.
Look, Nick is like, I'm about to go try that right now.
With fewer calories. You don't need,
I don't count calories. I'm 6 foot 220. I don't care.
This is important. You do not need mayonnaise to make canned tuna taste good. You need Frank's Red Hot.
No, you know what you add to that? Frank's Red Hot, but also a little bit of avocado, extra protein, extra fat.
Yeah, when
Yum.
I mean, this is a Christian YouTube channel, but yes, their slogan, I put that blank on everything, is for real. Frank's Red Hot is the best blank ever for anything.
Yeah, I agree. That's why I use it. 0 calories, adds a lot of flavor, and tuna, it's going to be the best option you have for protein to calorie ratio and price. It's literally unbeatable. Maybe egg whites, but
no, eat the.
And we lost.
Bridget wants you to eat the yolk.
Eat the whole egg. Come on, there's a lot of good nutrients in that. Can of tuna, 90 calories,
20 grams.
20 grams of protein, and Frank's Red Hot adds nothing to that. A hard-boiled egg will add about 70 calories to that, which, brings you to 160 calories, brings you up to about 26 grams of protein, and still fewer calories than a protein bar, and way cheaper. My eggs are free. I have chickens, but you know.
Nick is like, I'm going to get some of that right after the show.
No, I'm gonna go make myself some
Why
scrambled
buy
eggs.
protein? I know we're done with Romans. Why buy protein bars when you can buy this? Even in Biden-inflation prices, it's still cheaper than a protein. Those things are like
Boy, your
$3.99.
office must smell like funk with that in there. Woo.
Look, anyone who has a high protein diet that's like into fitness, your gas is going to be really awful.
Sell it, Pritchett.
Yeah,
Sell
protein farts are bad. Let's just get that straight. But you know what?
Kind of like the farts of people who don't exegete correctly. There we go.
You can walk outside.
It's hot gas.
and stand under
A fully orbed fart.
God's beautiful sky, look at the stars, rip one, and go back in so you don't offend your wife.
I live alone. So.
I live alone.
I just get to bask in it.
Wow, this has gone off the rails.
In France, we call that musk.
And with that, talking about protein gas, next Monday, we're going to get into what some would claim to be the heart of Romans, Romans 5 through 8. And begin, I hope we can do Romans 5 in 2 weeks, 1 through 11, and then 12 through 21.
You're funny.
And both of those are going to be explosive episodes because these are explosive verses.
Get this PowerPoint off. I want to see us more closely in our beautiful mugs here.
Well,
yeah, Romans 5 is going to be
anyway.
a protein fart. There we go.
Wow. All right. So, folks, we appreciate you watching the video, hanging around for our, well, I don't even know how to describe this past 5-minute conversation about tuna, but
Well, it's just passing like wind, passing wind.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, see, you don't ever know what to expect on the Biblical Rose Gallery. But
somebody said protein farts are epic.
That's going to live forever. Someone should clip that out and just put it on a loop.
Send it to James White and ask him what he thinks.
Hey, he knows about this stuff. He was a bodybuilder. I mean, not a bodybuilder. He was a power lifter.
Dude, that picture you showed that one time was hilarious. I couldn't even believe it.
You say what you want about James White. James White was power lifter extraordinaire back in the like 90s. That dude could move some weight.
Are you serious?
He carried, yeah, and he carried a lot of extra weight, but power builders aren't like bodybuilders. They don't have to be like all lean.
How do you know he can move?
Well, when you're carrying man-made constructs, you kind of just get bigger.
No, I mean, no. The thing is you want all those energy reserves, so you do pack on. I mean, bodybuilders they try to be lean for shows. Power lifters they try to like strongmen. Have you ever seen the average strongman? They kind of take the power builder physique and go well past that. But
yeah, they go ham on it.
Look, it's physics. Mass can move weight, and so you need a lot of mass. I could never be a power builder. Look at me, I'm scrawny. Look at Derek. Derek's even scrawnier. He's a runner. You can't move a lot of mass. You need that extra weight to move mass. And so when you're power lifter, you look at James White back in the day, that dude was big. And the thing is you want to do low reps and heavy weight so that your one rep max can be so out there.
Man, Pritchard, you keep me from Frank's Red Hot and Tuna. Come on.
Hey.
All right. Anyway, James White before he became a bike rider, was a power lifter back in the day, and dude could move some weight. So respect. He knows about tuna fish and egg whites. Anyway, we'll see you next week on the Biblical Rogues Gallery here on Trinity Radio.